All right, so welcome everybody to this week's FHIR Analytics Working Group. Let's go to the to-dos last week and just take a quick look. All right, recruiting, that's for everybody. Actually, I don't know how up to date all these are. I'm not going to read them all out, but so Nikolai, I'm sure we'll hear from you, see how the reference client and the API work is going. Me, Parquet FHIR draft documentation. We've done some work, a little bit of work on that in the past couple of weeks, but I think that's pretty much on the back burner. Chatted a little bit about it with John last week or two, but yeah, if there's any folks who are willing to help out with that, we'd be interested. John, I know you've been busy with some other work, but any kind of updates for the group from your end, John? Anything you've been able to find some time to work on?
No, not really. So I'll just participate and contribute today.
Totally fair. And then Gino was a logical model implementation with inheritance properties. Let's work on canonical resource inheritance. I don't really remember what that's all about. So not too much in terms of specific tasks. So
yeah,
if anybody,
one request from Graham to discuss.
Okay.
So about like parameters.
Yeah, let's just maybe switch over to that. That sounds like a good next topic.
And I have a request to discuss this idea of like materialize operation, because we're getting close in our implementation, and I would love to pick up your brains and think how it may look like. That's two topics.
Okay.
Yeah. For Graham,
All right.
I quickly introduce the context. Yeah. So the Graham is using SQL on FHIR views to build IGs, these nice web pages, and he wants to do it for different languages. And he wasn't very exact what he wants, but he said, so what our ideas about how to build this for different languages, should it be parameters, or should he write like several views for different languages? And my take was that we do have a constants, and potentially we may make constants variables, but this will make things more complicated. Yes, so it's going to be like parameterized view definition. So you're passing the parameter, and it's evaluated in a different ways depending on parameters. I'm not sure that we really want this. This can be done outside, so people can like have a template and compile several view definitions and then apply them. But this is up to us to discuss. Do we want to add this parameterization to the view definition? So we don't. Or maybe you have any other ideas how to solve this Graham's problem, but not so much details. He just wants to build for different views, for different languages. Yeah, John.
Yeah. So he's actually talking about interacting with view definitions outside of the context of a server implementation, because if there is a server implementation, there's already kind of pretty well established ways of indicating what language you want, right?
Yeah.
But he wants to do it sort of within the context of sort of a headless view runner, if you like. So that's just sort of one observation I would make. So if you had, for example, a server, there's already a way to tell it what language you want, and the server can implement that to the extent that they want to, right?
Yeah. But Graham wasn't able to describe for me. I asked it, for example, maybe there are different designation in different languages, let's say for the concept in a code system, and he wants just to build like tables for different languages. He said, maybe, I don't know, but guys, please discuss. So,
how does this get handled in the context of IG publication for other FHIR resources? So if I have some other FHIR resource that's published into the IG, and information from it is used to populate the fields, you know, like titles, descriptions, whatever, and I want to publish and I want to switch it over to Spanish or something, is there any current mechanism for handling multiple versions of other FHIR resources?
as I know, there is no established like way. So for some resources, there's special elements for translations. There's supplements in terminology, yes, where you can provide, so the designation and supplements. This is two things which can in terminology provide translations. And as I remember, when we were working on a Russian version, there was no established way to like have multiple languages for resources, for descriptions, and for all this stuff. But maybe it's progressed. So I just remember like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Maybe it's not very related to us. So how the language can influence the view definition. So that's the question. So we are not doing collation, yeah. So, and is this question about language or this question about parameters? So that's the question. I still don't understand.
I posted the thread where this question came up in the chat for more context as well. If you want to take a look at it.
So I'm just having a quick look, and it looks like there is a sort of language tag at the resource level, right? So I'm assuming he's talking about resources, although they're not quite resources, are they? But like if you sort of say a view definition is a resource, you could have like a language tag on that, say English or Spanish. And I guess if there was multiple of that same resource, but with different language tags, you could use logic in the thing that's running it to select that or prefer a certain language.
And I see the grammar is asking about like translating column name. This is like columns. This is a meta information, yeah? But as well, he is asking about translating some values, for example, terminology, coded values.
Yeah, so if you don't say anything, I guess it's kind of like language neutral. Or you could say, this is actually meant to be Spanish. Or maybe you have multiple versions of it in different languages.
Do you like talking about, are you talking about column name or about the values?
Well, if you put an extension at the root of the resource and say this whole resource is meant to be Spanish, well, should you have your column names in Spanish? I don't know, probably.
Okay, so no strong opinion about this.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it from a specification perspective. It just seems like, yes, if you parameterized view definitions, you could, the language choice could flow into it, right? But, what would, let's say there was a language choice as a parameter, let's say, what would we expect to happen, right, when that was run? That's what I'm missing. Like, how would that translate a column name
exactly
from English to Spanish? Exactly. It seems to me, just gut feeling, like outside of the boundaries of the view definition. In some ways, like an ETL process.
I agree. I don't think a parameter is actually the right way to solve this problem because, the view runner is not the thing that would know about this anyway. It's the view definition itself. Like if you want like multiple translations of, say, a view definition, you really need multiple translations of the view definition. I mean, the view runner could have the logic to sort of accept a preference and then look through the view definitions known to it to select like the most appropriate one. But really, it's a content thing, right? Like you need that content to be able to actually act on it. And I think it's totally valid to have a requirement for translated column names, descriptions, all that stuff. Absolutely. I don't know that it's terribly specific to SQL and FHIR. I think it's like a FHIR thing in general. However, we do have this slight wrinkle that we're like a logical model type based thing. And so I don't know exactly how this works. Like I suppose we could sort of point to that and say, well, this just works this way as per other resources in the FHIR spec. And then, as I say, I think it's different again in the server because it's not really different behind the scenes, but there is a prescribed way of instructing the server to use particular languages. But yeah, I just had a quick look and to me, on the face of it, you can tag a resource as a language, and you need your runner to be sort of aware of that and to pick that up and do something with it, you know, in the style of sort of accept language HTTP header. But I don't know if you need more than that.
Another question is probably about values. Yes. And that may be I don't know, is there any special function in FHIR or any FHIR extensions when you can say, translate this, I want to get this like coding in a specific language, you know, something like this. That's maybe related to us, because if I want to show the, let's say, I don't know, the condition table, yes, and in which language I will show this text for the concept. I may want to show in French, I may want to show in German. Yeah.
Would that be, I mean, to me, that would have to be a capability of FHIR, right? That we would just absorb. Then maybe there's potential use case for it. I mean, I think it's worth investigating, but yeah, in terms of like really altering how view definitions are processed to select or to somehow modify that for language seems, at least at this stage, seems out of scope.
Yeah, I think the obvious thing is the terminology, as Nikolai points to. We actually already do this in Pathling. We have a designation function, and you can pass that a language parameter, and then that will pass that to the terminology server. And then if the terminology server is language aware, it will send back language-based designations. So for example, if you have Loink or SNOMED CT and you ask for Spanish, you can actually get back Spanish display terms. So you can actually, you know, translate between display terms in your data if those translations are in the terminology. But again, that's not a standard FHIR function, because the FHIR terminology functions are not really complete in that respect. So, yeah, so there's kind of multiple levels of language, and with Pathling, like our runner, you can sort of set in configuration a default language. So if Graham was using our runner, he could kind of, and someone asked for Spanish, he could go looking for Spanish translations of the view definition itself. But he could also set Spanish as the default language, so that if terminology functions are being used, then it's being sent as like the preferred language and getting back the Spanish display terms. And so there could be like multiple levels. Yeah.
But so you introduce this designation function, but this is not this is not standard FHIR function. Yes, so you just.
That's right. Yeah. So member of is standard and subsumes is standard, but to round it out, we added translate and designation and property. So this is kind of the shape of the functions that we wanted for terminology, and haven't really got around to engaging with that process to sort of provide feedback on the sort of, because there is the percent terminology stuff in FHIR, but it's kind of a bit difficult to use for this purpose. Yeah.
Ideally, you may say, give me designation, providing language, or I don't know. Yeah. And that translate operation, so do you support translate on coded values? So I can use like concept map and translate from one.
Yeah.
But those are not a standard function. I think that like SDC guys probably need something like this as well, because when they're dealing with the questionnaires, there should be a lot of translation. And I remember our forms team did translations, but I don't know, do they extended FHIR for that? And this is not cheap operation. I don't think that everybody can implement it easily. So you need the full terminology, all these language packs and like concept maps.
Yeah, it depends on what you want to translate. It could be something very simple, or it could be things with dependencies and all sorts of complex stuff. But yeah, I feel like the whole terminology stuff is like perhaps a future topic. Like we could actually go down this rabbit hole and actually, it could be like a profile and another profile that we layer on top of SQL and FHIR, and we actually talk about some of these issues. What's the right level to pitch this abstraction at? So if somebody wants to use FHIR to interrogate terminology, and then we could, I think there's also a job to sort of interface with the FHIR spec and sort of review that in terms of fit for purpose for this, and you know what's the gap there and all the rest of it. But in terms of languages, there's also a pretty well defined way to deal with languages in terminology, and that's why we kind of made use of that, because it's also quite common in analytics to want to be language aware. So we implemented that.
All right. I mean, in terms of Graham's question or this topic, get a sense that we don't have a specific path forward. We're not really thinking of committing to exploring this further.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
One of us can probably respond to
I'm
that.
not convinced that it needs like some parameter function, to be honest. I don't know. I dive a bit more into it, but I feel like it's a content thing, and maybe we need like a worked example. But I think Graham's essentially just dealing with view definitions in the IG content. And, you know, can't we just, my favorite prefix, have like language annotated, multiple language annotated versions of that content if you want to have language translations of view definitions? I guess what I don't really understand is like the inputs. So I guess you configure the IG publisher for language somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. He can access that information about what the user's preferences are and feed that into his view definition code. And I guess if the content's there, then you want to select the right content, right?
As well, there is always option to do it after the view definition. Yes, so you may have a like table with translations and then join it, and they get translations. So if we're talking about,
yeah, but who provides the translations, and what's it? You know, what's the scope of the translations? You know, we can't just translate everything. We're really, this is specific to the view definitions that are in the IG, right?
and probably we can ask Graham for like real use cases, like and
yeah,
this multilingual IG and what he's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good next step. Is
but for us,
for a much more specific use case.
I think the terminology translation is still like probably quite actual task. We're not gonna address it right now, but it will eventually appear. And we discussed it at some like terminology part of SQL and FHIR. Eventually, we have to discuss this.
Okay, well, we can note it and then table it and put it, for discussion later in the future. That's not good to
Yeah, like you say, is there really a multilingual IG? Because I'm aware that there are a few translations, like the Russian one, I think there's a Chinese one. But as far as I understand, they're actually kind of separately managed. Like it's not like some sort of integrated multilingual thing. But maybe I'm wrong on that.
That's exactly like this. So there was designations before the language packs. There was designations, so only terminology was translated in the core, and some countries have contributed some translations. But as I know now, the recommended way to do it through the language packs, like supplements, terminology supplements, and the rest are doing that way, but not for the other stuff. So the people just copy and like overwrite and then like merging and updating with every release of the FHIR. Okay, so maybe let's jump to another topic.
Okay.
So what we want to build, so I can just explain the use case. So we have data in Postgres, and we want to do the black magic and replicate it to ClickHouse. And we want to replicate the view definition. So for the user, user just have to provide us view definition and somehow say, please keep this like columnar table up to date. And what operation it could be. like I suggested this materialize operation. So people giving us the view definition and say, I want to materialize it. It could be like bucket with updates, I don't know, updated Parquet files, or like different partitions on this file, I don't know. But the idea that all details are hidden, so just keep my view up to date, near real time or in batches or somehow, but this could be parameters of this materialize operation. And what do you guys think about this?
I think you touched upon this before, correct? Like as an extension to the API, it's not something that's in there currently in your API draft or anything like that, right?
Yeah, I just
Or in
suggest
addition.
this materialize operation. I don't know, is this name good? And do you have guys similar scenarios? Because in most of cases, yeah, there's a batch analytics, but like people want to have a like near real-time analytics, yeah? We can say we don't care, so we only provide you batch. We discussed that potentially we can do integration with the subscriptions, but this is like low-level details, yes? And I'm expecting that people like want like more high level of abstraction. Just keep this view up to date somehow, somewhere.
Yeah, we did something similar, Nikolai. We used the word continuous. It was more of a parameter on one of our APIs, but then we said, well, that's cool, but we also need to get into like a scheduled frequency for these as well. So it sort of brought in some of those requirements too, which going back, I don't know if I'd want to do that again, because it brings a lot of complexity, and it's also forcing a lot of the, like a scheduling capability into the server itself, which some people may have and some people may not want to have. So what we found that bringing this continuous, what you're calling materialized view, it brought in a lot of other complexity that I don't know if we need.
But that could be like parameters of this operation, yes? So like different operation may have different parameters. But the continuous, how like what would be the name of the operation? Here is a view definition, like what what continues? Like
it wasn't a separate for us. It was not a separate endpoint. It was a parameter
on a view
an exist. Yeah.
So you like put in extend and say this view definition is continuous. Yeah. Because in our case we're getting close to that. We have multiple destination. We can keep like this view in Postgres. We can keep this, and we want to like be able to export these views into other columnar storages. Yeah. I think like one view can be exported in many ways, like or like keep materialized.
Yeah, you have many ways. Like your Postgres implementation uses JSON-B, and it's all inherent in the database. There's we're more of an export style implementation where we're pumping out Parquet files. You're also talking about, I'm not too familiar with ClickHouse's, I guess it's a view capability, but do you have to keep it up to it's the materialized view, I guess? Do you have to keep it, you have to refresh it in some frequency?
Yeah, we will write some worker which will do this. But this is implementation details. So I think about for the user to say, here's the parameters, here's the destination, is it like Redshift or ClickHouse? Here's a view definition, keep it up to date whenever the new data are coming.
Yeah, so like that's a bit of state, isn't it? So you say, I want this view definition, I want you to materialize it here. And like you say, there could be multiple materializations of it. And now you've got a bit of state there that, and so you don't just need an API to tell it to do that. You also need APIs to say, okay, what are my current list of materializations and which ones do I want to remove, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Status, yeah, well, it's similar. But what's the current list and status? It's materialize. I think like the name, obviously, like the first thing I thought of is materializing it like locally, but you're also thinking about materializing it remotely, right, to a secondary system. Interesting. I was thinking of replicate, but that might be too remote oriented. And
even for Postgres, we have 3 ways to like it could be like table, materialized view, it could be just plain view, and somehow the user, and it's not one-time operation. Yeah. So in databases, you create the view, it's created, and sometimes you have operation to refresh. Yeah, so you say refresh this view. Some databases do provide this continuous views. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're just thinking of a name, materialize sounds like the best that I could think of at this point, but there's a remote element here as well. Yeah, I mean, as a black box operation, like I'm not seeing anything that like it seems consistent, right? And to the API, and it's not making any claims on the underlying implementation or anything like that. It's basically like such a directive to the server. It handles it however it handles it. Of course, it could have parameters that like Steve just mentioned, but other than that,
Yeah, there's another option like Steve did, and we, to be honest, in 8box now it worked like, so we just use CRUD. So if you create a view, it is created. So it is materialized by definition. But this is a little bit against like FHIR canonical patterns, because like Firefox saying when you like creating canonical, that doesn't mean it's applied. So, and yeah, so that's the question. So, or we can like keep it unspecified. So if people like creating view definition on server with a specific extension, we may treat it as like materialization. That's sometimes quite natural for the users. Yeah, I'm creating like in database. When you're creating view, you don't have to turn it on. Yes, so it's already there. You just create it.
yeah, that might be a good approach. I mean, just in terms of the API, that at least keeps the API smaller, considering this is like really a directive to the server to do something. Like, I guess the question is that worth another specific API, right? Rather than piggybacking on, a more simple API using a profile or something. I think I could see that being maybe a better trade-off.
The only problem then the separation may take some time. Yes, so when you create this stuff, sometimes people are confused because the view it is not a synchronous separation. So we kind of like we're accepting resource, we're saying okay, but the view is not ready. So there's still like hidden status and the hidden process which is doing this view. You can do it like Kubernetes, just introducing some status extensions into view, so you can pull the view definition and see how it progresses. But yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of thinking, yeah, so you could just have like some logic that if you create a view definition, then there's some configuration behind the scenes that you've said, yeah, I want all my view definitions in both Postgres and ClickHouse. The trouble with like having an API for it is we need like a sort of a resource for it. And I don't mean a resource in the FHIR sense, I mean like a resource in the REST sense, in that you have to be able to sort of interrogate this piece of state that you're creating in all the different ways that you want to be able to. And how does that map into like FHIR operations or whatever to actually drive that? I think that could be kind of a little bit tricky. And then I was thinking, well, what's already there? So the things that are there are that we have a view definition CRUD, but we don't have much else unless you want to talk about something like subscriptions or something where they've sort of got a similar thing, right? Where you sort of ask for something to be created, but then there's a thing in the server that you can read back out and see the status of and all the rest of it. And I feel like if you were going to actually bring it all into the API, you almost need something similar.
Yeah, we can do like instance level operation like $status on the view definition for that. So when you created the view definition, and we have to like provide some at least recommendations. Yes, so should people treat creation of view definition as a trigger for some operation or not on a runner? Yeah, or we say like in FHIR, it's just like definitional operation, nothing should happen, and you should have another operation to like materialize it, like, or run it.
Yeah, to be honest, when I was first thinking about this, and maybe because I didn't think about it hard enough, I was thinking more along the lines of what Steve was talking about, where it would be kind of a variation on an export. So, if you did it, you can do an export and it will put some files somewhere and then you can go get them. But maybe like there's a variation on that where you say
Continuous export.
export it, but keep exporting, right? But again, you run into the problem of, you know, what is that thing you've created? Like you've given it an ongoing instruction, and that thing possibly needs special parameters, and that thing also potentially needs to be turned off, or does it live past, you know, when your server gets rebooted and all this sort of thing.
Yeah, but the continuous export sounds interesting, yeah. So, but it's slightly different, yeah. So the just export, it should finish sometimes, yeah. So, but this continuous export will never finish. But you still have like cancel operation, which we will provide for export as well, yeah. The status operation, so you can see what the status of this continuous export. There are a lot of similarity, yeah. So with the export, should we mix them or try to mix them, or like create another like continuous export operation, which will just duplicate everything from export but behave slightly different?
But it sounds like those are two different things, right? One meaning the setup of this sort of this view, particularly in the remote case, and then the continuous replication, right? This seems like two distinct activities to me. You know, maybe the way we were talking about it before is sort of they were conjoined, but like in the continuous case, and maybe maybe Steve implemented it in some certain way, like we were talking about it as if they were one, right? Like let's say you had a ClickHouse database, and you're talking to your Postgres database here, ClickHouse database here, send it a command that says like.
But even if it's like
materialize.
Parquet files on S3, yes, so I still probably need some way to this continuous export, or like updated export, get the changes daily, nightly, weekly.
Right.
People are doing this in bulk export with like since operation, so you can kind of doing another export with a since operation, yes, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's true.
But
I mean, you'll have to think about that. Meaning a long-lived continuous export style operation. That seems like its own use case, the one that you were talking about. I mean, you could maybe use it as the basis for something you're talking about, but I think it's not complete, at least the way I was thinking about what you're saying. But maybe it has its like that might be a valuable use case on its own. I'm trying to say.
But I'm curious, John, so in your like analytics, are you providing some like continuous use for your, and I always batch?
No, we've absolutely done continuous views, and that view might be like a Parquet table that's getting updated, appended to commonly, or it could be something like a Kafka topic, right? So, but we haven't solved this problem of how do you instruct, the thing to do it. I was just thinking another option could be, and I'm not saying this is a good option, but you could effectively have like an element or a couple of elements on the view definition itself. So you could like have an array of targets, if you like, sort of requested targets, and you could even have an array of sort of like actual sort of locations that the server kind of populates. So maybe you write the view definition in and give it a couple of sort of coded values like Postgres and ClickHouse, for example, and then you write that view definition in and you go back and you read it out, and it will have some sort of additional content populated into it, which tells you where those things that you've requested are once they exist. So that information kind of lives within the view definition, the view definition itself. That's the only other sort of way I can think of that to do it.
Yeah, and that's how Steven, to be honest, we implemented it. So like keeping this stuff close to the view definition. And this is how the Kubernetes is doing. You like publishing resource, and then the status field appears in this resource, and you understand like what's going on with this deployment process. Yeah, so but it looks like resource. You posted the definitional part and the status part in the resource, and the status part is updated on the server, depending on the status of the. And this gives like quite good mental model. Yeah, if I want to remove resource, I just delete resource. If I potentially able to update it, I can update. Not all resources can be updated. Yes, and so at least this CRUD style manipulation for that. As well, I'm thinking maybe the view may have a like very specific annotations for materialization. Let's say I want to set specific types on the columns, when I'm exporting. And there are some crazy types, like data types in different databases. So, and then it's like natural to live with the view, like additional annotation, like we discussed. So please export column with this specific type. So that's interesting option. But the question: do we want to recommend it, or we like leave it for implementers to make this decision?
Well, it could start life as extensions, which then we look at promoting into, the spec. I can imagine like a couple of extensions that you could do it with. Yeah, your Kubernetes example, I think, is a good one. You post a resource in with a few things that you define. Maybe there's some implementation specific annotations, and then you read it back out, and it's just got this gigantic list of all the things that it's actually basically done, including a whole bunch of implementation specific things. So maybe you're on AWS and it's like, using spot capacity, and it's, using all these different types of storage and all that sort of thing. And it will reflect all that stuff back to you. But your instruction to it is relatively agnostic, and it interprets all that stuff in a kind of platform specific way.
So you're suggesting just to like introduce few common extension, like probably the status, I don't know, something else, like timeout to synchronize and see if people will use it.
I think that might be a good first step. But we'd need to kind of I think write down what the list of these things are and have a look at it.
And we can say this in the spec that implementation may treat the creation of ViewDefinition as a trigger for like specific process, like keeping up to date, and may add the extra extensions to tell about the status of this resource. And Steve, am I right? So you did exactly that, yes? So when you posting ViewDefinition, the process started, you like keeping it continuous?
Yeah, I'd have to pull up my documentation, but you can write a view definition to the server. It's a resource, it just stays there. Then you perform an operation on that resource, which I think is similar to run in the new spec model. But we have parameters to that run operation. We call it one time only. We have scheduled, and you feed it a cron schedule. You say, every Tuesday or whatever. And then the last one is continuous, which is what you're talking about. And in all cases, they return, a URL to us in the style of exports, and then we perform. The UI will perform operations on those new endpoints to figure out the status. How many records have been exported, what percentage are they complete, and so forth. And in the case of continuous, it's never ending until you kill it, until you delete it.
And how you kill it, like the special operation to cancel this, or you just delete the view definition?
You can enable or disable. It's enabled by default. You could disable it to sort of pause it, and you can also delete it.
And when you delete the view definition, then like all this.
We're not deleting. There's two separate concepts of the view definition remains, but there's this other endpoint.
Okay, so you're kind of posting on specific, like canceling.
Yeah, I think we call it like an export job, I think is what it's called. Yeah.
So those two options, like having it as a like separate set of operations, keeping it inside the view definition.
Right, yeah.
For the view definition, I see like very specific annotations for this export, and the discoverabilities, at least for the continuous stuff. Looks like interesting, at least you have a lot of ways to look.
Right.
The view definitions, and what the status of them. Okay, so maybe we can try to implement and then like and then discuss.
Well, I mean, to ask for it to be done, you know, what do you need to tell the server? Is there kind of some certain destinations that the server knows about? Do you need to like tell it what name to give it? You know, could you potentially ask for it to be materialized in Postgres twice as two different names?
Yeah.
And then the status, does that kind of tell you if it's been done, but does it also tell you details about where to go to find it? Or do you already know that somehow?
Yeah, I would say just like first answer. So I would put the like exact name and destination. So then I know where to find this table. Yeah. So I can say this is a ClickHouse and the table name should be like that. Maybe some extra parameters, whether the table like maybe even indexes or something like this, which I want to build. And then because it will take some time, I can look at some kind of status. So is it in progress or it's like ready to use? If it's like synchronized like in some intervals, I should understand like last synchronization time or stuff like this.
And I guess, you know, if you ask for something that the server can't do, does it just knock you back straight away, or does it do like, or does it tell you what it has done, which is maybe like a subset of what you asked for, all that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, especially the partial failure. Yeah, if we put it into the view definition, yeah, then probably like new extension will appear which say that status like partially failed or like. It's kind of mixing, but when I analyzing what the Kubernetes guys did, so they decided to go with one resource because it's like more natural for the users. To be honest, there are two resources in like etcd database. There are two resources, but they exposing them as a one resource to the user because it's easy to manipulate. But I'm not sure that we should apply this similar pattern. Yeah, essentially this is another resource which is called status. And it's living outside, but for the simplicity, it's like they put it into one resource. So when you're getting deployment, you don't have to get deployment status resource. Yes, you're just getting deployment and it has a like deployment status. And when you're deleting deployment, it just stop everything around. Yes, but this is kind of trade-off. So that's not like very aesthetic, but very pragmatic for the user.
Yeah, it does have some problems putting in the resource from like a sort of authoring perspective. So, you know, if you want to use the server to keep your view definitions and you want to keep track of like if you make an update to the definition of it, you don't necessarily want a new version if you're just changing like some status of it or something. You kind of potentially want to keep those things apart. But I can also see that it kind of gets quite complicated and messy if you start to create more and more resources. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
And this is unsolved problem in FHIR servers as well, because like Graham's and this spec tells if there is a list of search parameters, if you're posting new search parameter, that doesn't mean that you're creating let this search parameter should start working. Yes, so it is just like store it and list it, but it doesn't mean that you can start searching by this search parameter. And different servers do provide the way to turn it on. So like special, but this is not documented in FHIR. So there is no documented way to like dynamically add search parameters to the FHIR server. Every server do it in their own way.
Well, yeah, I mean, and resource boundaries are somewhat arbitrary in FHIR. Like we have different things grouped together based on whether it is likely that you want to edit these things together. And like individual decisions have been made per resource based on what people think that is. But it doesn't always make sense for all use cases. So it's a tricky one.
All right, so more thinking needed on this topic, I think. So maybe we'll take it back and maybe next week think about it a little bit more. We are at time, so I will have to go, but so I think we'll call it for today. That sound good?
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Sorry I'm late. I just had a company call that I just got off of. So
no problem. We'll catch you next time, Adam.
Yeah, I'll send you a note. We can catch up. Yeah, excellent job again, Nikolai, at the FHIR analytics session. That was one of my favorites. So
thank you.
All right. I'll see you guys next week.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.